Once again, I'm Bob Meyer. I'm one of the faculty co-directors here at AI at Wharton. I'm also a professor in the marketing department. And today we're going to be doing a webinar, and this is one of a series that we're going to be having on the way in which AI is sort of affecting everyone's lives and how it's affecting individuals and business. And today we're going to be talking about we have three great panelists who are going to be talking about the issue of AI and machine creativity. And I think for most people, when you think about what are some of the exciting and also worrisome aspects of AI, it's this idea that we could actually get to the point where machines match humans in terms of their ability to not only create ideas, but also create images, and so on and so on and so on. And so as a way of exploring this, we have three panelists today. Yannick Exner, who's a doctoral researcher, as you see, at the TUM School of Management at Munich. Dokyun Lee, who's associate professor at BU. And also Ankit Sisodia, who's an assistant professor at Purdue University. Now, before we get started, hold on. I'll give kind of an overview of the layout here. What we're going to be doing is they're going to have each of the speakers is going to speak for maybe about 7 minutes, maybe a little bit more if they want to give an overview of their research and their views on this particular topic. Then I'm going to interact with them a little bit on questions, but basically I think we want to keep this thing free flowing and very interactive so that if anybody else wants to have something critical they want to jump in, please feel free to do so. And then really I think it's going to be the most fun part of it is towards the end where we're going to have an open 15-minute or maybe more section for Q&A audience participation. Now, a little bit about, before we get started, a little bit about what AI at Wharton is. This is a relatively new initiative undertaken by the Wharton School, in which we're trying to basically develop the Wharton School as being a focal point for research that's related to AI as it affects businesses, as it affects people. And effectively, we want to develop the idea that if you're interested in work and related to how AI is affecting future at work, business solutions, education, people, consumers, and so forth, that AI at Wharton will represent a melting pot for that. Not only is a source for providing funding for work in this area, but also providing a source of dissemination of knowledge in that area. Hence, this webinar series is one part of that. A little bit about some of the people that are involved. I'm one of 4 co-directors, and on the line over there is Mary Perk. She's the executive director, and she's the one that kind of makes all of this happen. And along with me is Stefano Pantoni, who's my colleague in the marketing department, Kartik Hosangar, who is in the OID department here, and also Sunny Tambe, who is also in the OID department. Now, before we get going, one last final thing is I want to give you a plug for a couple of things that we have coming up. One of which is if you like these webinar series, we have a couple more that are coming up, one of which is AI in the workforce. And that's coming up on February 16th. And another one is going to be on AI and innovation. Same basic format. It's going to be for about an hour long. And hopefully we have these things, not only some great speakers on these webinars, but also really an opportunity to have a broad discussion over these topics. The other thing is we have coming up on May 22nd and 23rd in Philadelphia, we're going to have an actual physical conference. So if you're kind of tired of the webinar Zoom thing and you actually want to see people and see people physically, come to the AI at Future at Work conference, and you see kind of the link to it down there, and I encourage you to go ahead and make an application for it. Okay, so to get going, today our panelists are going to be, as I said, Yannick Exner, Dokyun Lee, and Ankit Sisodia. We're going to start off with Yannick, and he's going to be talking about some of his work on the power of generative marketing. Can generative AI reach human-level visual marketing content? Yannick?
Great, thanks, Robert. And let me just share my screen. Maybe first of all, thanks for the invitation and also organizing this. I think Mary, Carol, and Katie. It's great to be here. And I think you should see my screen now. Perfect. So I would love to talk about the power of generative marketing, which is joint work with my co-authors Jochen Hartmann and Samuel Domde. And we wondered whether generative AI imagery can reach human levels in terms of marketing content, and whether this marketing content is similarly good than typical human level traditional content. And as we started off, I think we all had a very similar experience in 2023, which was the year of generative AI, that we've seen all of this anecdotal evidence that generative AI is being adopted in a broad area of use cases. So we've seen like big newspaper outlets using generative AI to cover their cover page with generated content and print advertisement. We've seen advertisements and also in ideation areas of product design, generative AI at work with quite impressive results. And last but not least, I think all of us have seen it in social media. And at least my feed was just filled all the way to the top with Gen AI nuggets. So, but from a researcher or a scientific perspective, we asked ourselves whether this actually works in terms of marketing metrics. So how do people perceive these images and how do they react up on them, especially if they are not primed, so if they do not know whether this image is AI generated or not. To do so, we needed to find a way to compare human images with generated images and came up with this approach, which we will use throughout this talk today. So I would just like to quickly elaborate on it, where we start with a human image on the left-hand side. So this is our benchmark image, just a typical human image. In this case, it's a social media image. And we would like to derive a lower, but basically come to the right-hand side where we have a what we call synthetic sibling, an AI-generated image, which looks more or less the same, has the same visual features in it, and the same objects. So, but to do this, and especially at scale, we developed this process where we ran this human image on the left-hand side through an image-to-text model called, in this our case, Clip Interrogator, which gave us in a sense, a compressed image, a textual description of this image. In this case, a woman sitting on top of a mountain with a backpack. So this way we capture or we grasp the most important aspect of the image, even though we cannot capture everything. For example, the details in the valley in the background. And then we ran it through a text-to-image model, just the reverse of what we've just done a second ago, and we generate this synthetic image, AI generated. Now, to scale this and not do this with a single image, we've done this with 6 images on the left-hand side. These were the benchmark images, and with 13 different diffusion models to generate 20 images per diffusion model. So a total of 6 times 13 times 20, roughly a little bit more than 1,500 images. And now that we generated the images, our main question was, as discussed before, right, does it work? And we assessed those dependent variables, quality and realism in terms of perception. So we set up a survey with humans who were not primed, so they did not know whether this image that they've seen was human-made or AI-generated, and had them rate this on a typical Likert scale from 1 very low quality to 5-point Likert scale, 6 very high quality, and the same for realism. And what we learned is, well, it does work with a little asterisk. So it works. We're kind of getting to a point where we are statistically indistinguishable in terms of the perception of quality and realism. So people have a similar perception of AI-generated content with human-generated content. Now, looking specifically into what this looks like in terms of model-free evidence, we see here just the average score of those images on those 2 quality and realism dimension, quality on the x-axis and realism on the y-axis. Now, if we, for example, look at the top left, the benchmark is the little triangle, we see that AI is very often better than the benchmark image, the human one, which could also relate to the quality of the human one. But we also see at the bottom right, for example, the Schwarzkopf advertisement, where the human benchmark just far outperforms all of the AI models, which could be due to a variety of reasons. For example, text, where the machine creativity is not as good as the human creativity or the human quality. So when running this on a more sophisticated manner with regression models, we learn that very often there's no statistical distinguishability or significance between AI and human. So we can say that AI and humans are kind of on par, at least we cannot differentiate with them, between them. And similarly, we even have some images, like at the top left, where the AI images outperform the human counterpart. Now, in a second question, we asked ourselves, does it work in marketing? And specifically here, very similar setup. We looked at the likelihood to like an image or the likelihood to comment upon this image, and ran this with social media use cases. Again, in the lab, we asked people, how likely are you to like upon it, to like this image or to comment upon this, and learned the same thing. It works. We get to statistical indistinguishability, but not in all the cases. Let me just skip this today because we're a little time constrained. So we immediately jump to number 3, which was the verification in the real world, where we ran an actual marketing campaign and assessed the click-through rate as our dependent variable. So we have ran a campaign with all of those images, just kind of in an A/B setting, and assessed how high the click-through rate is for those images. And again, we reach a level where we cannot distinguish between AI and human content. So if we look at the results here, we see that this is the table on the right-hand side. All the way, you see the click-through rate, our dependent variable. And we see that the benchmark, the human image, ranks 10 out of 14, where versus the best model, Stable Diffusion 1.3, we do not have a significant difference, but still it's a positive significant difference of 21.5%. So 9 of our 13 AI models yield a higher click-through rate than the human benchmark. And we also learn, because now this is significant, that the best performing model and the last 2 or the worst 2 performing models actually have a significant outperformance or underperformance versus the best model. And hence we argue that model choice matters, and is also what we will probably find from a very subjective view looking into this. And yeah, if you're interested, then here's the link to the paper, and thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot. Before we jump on to the next speaker, Yannick, sort of what do you kind of see the some of the applications of this going forward?
I think we are probably looking, because the cost of generating images are so much lower, that we are very likely to look into a future of either much more tailored content. So you could go to like a hyper targeting of n equals 1, and you would not have specific groups of customer or target groups, but rather you can target a single person with a specific image. Or it just goes the other way, that we get like more and more trash in a sense, because it's so cheap to generate, and it's hard to quality control for it. So we do not really know what's out there, but people just shoot in the hope for it working to some extent. Okay.
Yes. I guess I have to ask you, maybe someone else has a comment, question on this as well, is that obviously this is not, this whole, the ability to develop, hyper realistic images where we can't tell the difference between whether a person took it or a machine took it, or whether it's of a person, or purely synthetic, is obviously fairly controversial of late. And I was kind of wondering, what's your take on that? Like to what degree, should there be, should we be starting thinking about regulations in terms of imposing the work that you do? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so I think it's a very broad discussion, especially if you take open source models and kind of community maintained or community fine-tuned models into account. So where people just kind of on their own computer fine-tune models and kind of go beyond what you would say is allowed per regulation. So this kind of limits to what we can do with regulation. On the other hand, we can, for big players, let's say, for example, for Google Ads or like just the typical marketing channels, there's for sure ways to assess this, but I'm not sure whether this would be like an industry role or like a regulatory role. And this is like to partially also what we see. So if you, maybe to just add this point, those community-based models, they allow you to have many more degrees of freedom. So you can generate much more content and diverse content with them, but on the same time, they're not as accessible.
Okay, that's
for the
good.
users.
Well, hopefully we can, yeah, go on. We can go ahead and circulate back to that top a little bit later. So next on deck is DK Lee from BU. So DK, BK.
All right. Let me share my, I think the screen is shared. All right. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Thank you for organizing. I'd like to present this generative AI, human creativity and art. This is joint work with my student, Eric Zhou. And you can find the paper here at tiny.cc/genart. So just a little bit of background. So since I have only 7 minutes, this will be more of an overview. I'll be very quick about it. I think all the audience here know that in 2022, that text-to-image model was used to win a state art fair. And shortly after that, even photography art contest was won with these tools, and the artist refused to get the prize after that. Shortly after, not too long ago, there was a psychological science study that was published saying that people perceive AI-generated faces as more real than actual human faces. So I'm gonna just skip through this brief history. There has been a lot of work since about 2015-16, but it's not until 2022 March when Midjourney, dall-e 2, and Stable Diffusion all came out within a couple of months that it became mainstream, and you can see estimated number of users on top. And now we have dall-e 3 built in. Bar just announced this a couple of days ago, so it's becoming more mainstream than ever. So research question we asked here is how does adoption of generative AI, in particular text-to-image model, where you prompt it and then you get an automated image out, affect humans' creative productivity? First easy question. And second is generative AI enabling humans to produce more creative content? And here we piggyback on the philosophy of creativity literature, where it defines creativity in two different parts: a value, which is contextual, and novelty, which I'll talk about how we operationalize this. And lastly, we also explore for whom and when is Gen AI effective. So the empirical setting was one of the largest art sharing platform. Where people share and like and favorite and comments. And outcome variable of interest for us was per each individual artist's productivity as measured by log of monthly number of posts. Value, it's defined in the social media itself, favorites per view. You can just use favorites or views. We decided to control for views. Novelty is we operationalize it using other large language, multimodal language model to embed and find the vector representation. It's defined as pairwise distance for each artifact, in this case, artwork, compared to all prior artifact, all the produced artwork. And we have identified adopters, text-to-image model users, which in our analysis enters as treated versus the non-adopters, then controls. And we see the impact of artists adopting these tools on productivity and creativity. So how do people express their creativity and novelty? So humans can express, this is one way we operationalized, and that's humans can express creativity via two main ways: content and visuals. Content is literally what is in the picture or art, right? Concerns the focal object and relations depicted in the artifact. And visual considers the stylistic and pixel level elements. So here, 2x2 table shows you have same content, both cats, and same visuals. It looks like, it's easily maybe same sort of animation. Here you have both cats, therefore same content, but different visuals. So this one has a bit more flatter visual. And here, similar visual, but different content. Here you have different content and visuals. So we can operationalize this with using multimodal language models. And based on our data set, here is most novel content. So for example, fractal landscape or transmagnetic excitation field comes out as the most novel content. This is least novel content. So, some mountain or portraiture, something that you may see a lot of. And here's the most novel visual. So pixel level or style element, this is what our algorithm said was the most novel compared to least novel visual. So again, this is something that you may see in museums or something. This was the most valuable versus least valuable. So the Y variable of interest, mice and cocoa, about 61% of people who viewed it favored it, as opposed to these two. Someone actually uploaded a Shutterstock image in the website. Nobody liked it. And the other one, I don't know why it didn't get so much love. All right, so right on to the actual result. We see obviously significant lift in creative productivity within the first several months. So it increases by 50% during the first month of adoption. So x-axis, you see month since adoption, and the Y variable here and the Y-axis. And with the 100%, so doubling the amount of number of art produced following in the following month, stabling off to about 25% in months after. So we have many more months after this, and still consistently at around 25%. So this translates to about, for an average adopter, about 7 additional posts during the adoption month, up to 15 additional posts in the following month. So average people post 15. Okay. Now, what happens to value, right? Value here is defined as number of favorites earned per percentage of favorites earned per view. On average, people on the platform or artwork gather about 2 favorites per 100 views, so 2% rate. Now you can see again here, once the treated or the people who adopt text-to-image model, their value also goes up. Over a 1% increase in the likelihood of receiving favorites per view, right? This translates to about 50% increase over pre-treatment value, right? What happens to novelty? So average content novelty, actually what's depicted within the image, you can see it goes down on average. So people are producing similar kind of content once they adopt. However, the peak max novelty continued to increase, which means that while there is some sort of inefficiency, people producing same sort of content, the creative landscape is actually growing. As a result of these artists adapting text-to-image models, right? So the result for visual novelty actually is, you can see, stark decrease, and this is somewhat obvious because people are using these models, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and dall-e 3 or dall-e 2 back then, and these are trained to sort of produce similar things. Unless you have a wildly different and your prompt foo is really great, it's hard to get very different things, right? So you can see this decreasing. But who is really winning and when? Generative AI decreases content and visual novelty in aggregate, except it is increasing the content creativity landscape. Who wins and for what? And what type of novelty bring value? I'm skipping this due to time. Please read the paper. It's an advertisement. But I want to present 2 more, easy to understand. So we also tracked the correlation to value, again, favorites earned per view, between that and visual novelty and content novelty over time. And you can see as time goes, content novelty actually is highly correlated or predictive of the value capture. So in the land of Midjourney, content is king, right? And lastly, who captures value? So we wanted to see the value here, again, defined as the favorites earned per view. Once people adopt this, does it actually spread or concentrate the value captured? And long story short, these tool is promoting more equal value capture. So among the adopters, favorites per view is spread more evenly. So takeaways, productivity increases, value increases. There is a average content novelty decreases, but the peak content novelty increases, suggesting inefficient but still expanding creative landscape. Visual novelty is decreasing overall. winners and losers divided. I didn't really talk about that. And Gen AI promotes more equal value capture among the adopters. So I would like to say, we would like to say, this is sort of a human AI generative synesthesia happening. Gen AI dreams up as the world would, right? Having all this knowledge, and individuals filter, right? And that's it.
Great, thank you. There have been a couple of questions that kind of popped in. We might as well sort of get them. One of which was that, are there any confounding factors like the style of painting, say watercolor, vector art, oil, pastel, etc., which influences some of those numbers, some of those things that you presented?
So the question is, I don't understand the confoundings. But
Well, okay, now it's a fact, not really confounding, but basically, or in terms of when people are responding to novelty, for example, what is the novelty? Is it suddenly what stands out is, oh my gosh, you never see brush strokes like that, or is it something about the image itself?
I see. Yeah, the question.
Yeah.
So it's not. So the users don't give value of novelty. That's our algorithm based
Okay.
on large language model that's learned, has seen way more arts and paintings than any individual would
I
ever
see.
would.
I got it.
And
Okay.
then similar. So it just
Yeah.
embeds that, and then we see the distance. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I guess within that, then what goes into that? Like, for example, can you become more novel if you just simply make it oil, okay, as opposed to everything else? So that would contribute to it, right?
That would be all
Yeah.
incorporated. For example, if a digital image can distinguish all of these different features,
Hmm.
the large language multimodal
Yeah.
large language models would be able to tell apart the differences if the digital images actually do have that representation.
Okay. There's one other question which kind of related to one I want to ask, and maybe we could hold this off to later, but it's the question of to what degree that having access to these tools make you be more productive or creative in other domains. Like certainly it's the case that doing this allows people to do paintings and things they never could have possibly have imagined. They can just dream things and suddenly it comes to be. And also in some sense, so for example, does it help you be more open to problem solving in other contexts? Or a question came up is in the context of like teamwork and so forth. This is obviously you don't study that, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, not in this study, but we do
Right.
have some ideas related to that, like how generative AI tools could be used to promote group productivity. So I think one way it could do is you can automate a lot of divergent thinking, right? And then you can ask the tools to provide divergent thinking.
Okay.
And in the end, it's great as a sort of brainstorming tool, and
Right.
people always like filter things. So in a way, I think it'll follow the same sort of MO, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. One other question before we move on to Yannick. In that, did you have a sense for like the number of this is another question that came up, the number of interactions to generate the final image, like do people, it's just all of a sudden they get a brilliant idea, or is it the fact that it takes them a really long time to get these really more creative images?
very good question, and we actually have a not working, but we just started a paper on that where we actually collect all the user level in prompting and activities on Midjourney, and we can see literally everything: their prompt, their images.
Yeah.
What do they do? Do they accept it or upscale or take it? So we'll have some answers within a couple of months, I would say.
Okay, but you don't have any answers now, though.
No, I mean,
Okay.
I did
All
try.
right. Okay, we'll have to stay tuned. Okay.
Yeah, one thing, one thing. I tried this contest within my class, and the variance is very high. People just like prompt like 20 times, or just there are people who are happy after twice. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. So next up is Yannick Sisodia from Purdue, and he's going to be talking about some very interesting work on using some AI tools for product design. So, Yannick.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And so I'll be talking about how can we use, deep learning methods to find interesting product attributes and then use them to, generate new products. So this is joint work with Alex Burnap and Vineet Kumar, both at Yale. All right. Right. So, I mean, the motivation for this project was before even all generative AI tools became, widespread, was that we knew that, visual design matters for consumer choices across product categories. That when you go to buy a car or buy fashion or buy furniture, you don't just, go and see what are the performance characteristics of cars or of, apparel or a furniture, but you also look at how do they, look, and a lot of your choice gets influenced by the product's looks. So next, what we thought was that, okay, we want to incorporate some information from these products' visual appearance into our subsequent econometric models. So how do we do that? So our goal became that suppose we have lots and lots of images of products, we want to find a method that discovers these product attributes or visual characteristics. And this method then automatically quantifies all these characteristics. And if it is able to do so, then we can use them in some well-known marketing applications like perceptual mapping, visual conjoint analysis, which I'll talk about, and recommendation system. So this is an important point. So what we want is for each product, we want to find a vector of visual characteristics, let's say a J-dimensional vector. And we want that vector to be having interpretable characteristics. So I'll just explain in a couple of slides, what do I mean by interpretability over here. So, right, so we base our methodology on disentanglement representation learning. This is one of the subfields within representation learning and deep learning. And the way to, it can be defined is that in a very layman's language is, suppose if I change the value of one particular dimension, let's say Z1, and I fix all the other dimensions, then the image should only change in one particular way. So if you look at the top row over here, I'm changing Z1, keeping all the other J dimensions fixed, and only dial color is changing. Similarly, in second row, I'm just changing Z2, keeping others fixed, and I see that strap color is changing. So in a way, if we look from our human eyes, we are able to clearly say that, okay, this is very, very interpretable. And what this helps is that, if such a tool is available to product designers, etc., it can allow for controllable image generation. So they will be able to very minutely vary, each of these dimensions and then see the subsequent change. So we base our methodology on a well-known algorithm in deep learning, BAE. I won't go into the details, but you can go and refer to the paper. What disentanglement does is it imposes one additional constraint on top of VAE, and these are technical details I won't go into today, but it is essentially not very sophisticated like the modern generative AI tools, but it still allows us to see interpretable visual characteristics. Now, this particular framework runs into a theoretical problem, which says that if you just use images, that is, you just do unsupervised learning, then there are some conditions in which it says that it's fundamentally impossible. So essentially, you require some sort of supervision, you require some labels. So one common approach is that you get people to label, products. You ask people to tell, okay, how dark is the dial color, how big is the, dial size, etc. But the problem with this approach for us was that we did not want to use any, human involved. We wanted the method to find it on its own. So one of our methodological contributions in this work was that to use some information that is already present to us as marketing researchers. So we thought that, if designers of different brands are already designing products, differently, differentiating their brand visually from other brands, then perhaps brand can serve as a good, label. In other contexts, we thought that perhaps at different price points, maybe products are designed differently, then price might serve as a good label. So we tried both of these, supervisory signals, and then we went on to estimate our model in which we added one supervised loss, which is right here over at the end. So this is the way to estimate the model. Again, I won't go into the details, but probably I'll skip a couple of slides over here and go to something more interesting. Right, so we use data set from Christie's in which, we had images like these of all the wristwatches that had been auctioned there from 2001 to 2020. We collected a bunch of other, information about these watches. Then we ran our method and we found 6 visual characteristics. We varied Z1, we're finding its dial color, dial size, strap color, rim color or the bezel color, knob size, and dial shape. So these are the 6 characteristics which our method was saying, varies a lot in wristwatches. There are other finer details which this method is not able to, find. These are the 6 coarse characteristics that this method is able to find. Now we use this to conduct visual conjoint analysis. Essentially, in visual conjoint analysis, the first challenge is you want to know the characteristics which this method gives. And the second thing is you have to specify the particular quantification of each characteristic and generate, different designs. So this method is able to do that. And we kept some of, respondent choices in the training set, some in the test set. Then we measured the accuracy of our embedding over other pre-trained nets, and we found that ours was having a very good accuracy. And interestingly, for all people interested in application of this particular work, is we could generate the ideal watches for different consumer segments. So when we ran our survey, we asked people about their demographic details, and we could find that, okay, the watch on the left is the ideal watch for a young, moderately affluent female, whereas watch on the right is probably which is preferred most by older males. So this, work can probably, guide product designers into how they can design products which will be liked by people. Yeah, we found, that these ideal watches do take up a lot of choice share from these segments, but do not take choice share in the rival segment. So, right, so just to conclude, so I think I, probably showed you that, how we can use deep learning methods to find interpretable characteristics. These would be very useful in case of, regulation that comes up that says that, people should be recommended things, which they should be able to control their recommendations, etc. Some of the rules that have been proposed in Europe, allude to that. And for managerial application, it can probably help them in generating designs very, very controllably. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ankit. I have a couple questions. One of which is sort of linking your work back to the work of Yannick and DK. When they're thinking about creativity and coming up with ideas, and obviously they're not doing work in the area of product design, but it's a very much of a top-down approach to thinking about design and creativity. That basically, here's a set of tools, and you turn it over to an artist, and the artist basically uses those tools to come up with something that people find really amazing and cool. And in some sense, this is sort of the classic thing between the artist and the engineer, and you're kind of approaching it very much from a bottom-up sort of perspective, which is to say, okay, we're going to have these tools, which is basically going to go through, all possible designs, and then basically use this to sort of discover the one that people naturally would like. And so, so this is sort of a question to you, but obviously your research doesn't really address this, but I just wonder your intuition. Which is better? Which is going to come up with the better watch? DK's approach, in which they're giving it over to artists and using all these AI tools to create a beautiful watch, or your approach?
So I mean, just thinking off my feet, I think it might depend on the context. Like in case of product design, you need to be creative, but the creativity is often constrained. For example, if you're designing a car, it needs to have a headlight. It needs to have, tires. It broadly cannot look like a motorcycle, for example. But when you're thinking about, let's say, advertising, and if you're creating a message for an ad, you can be totally creative, and there are less constraints, I would say. So maybe, both the approaches have their own uses. Sometimes you want the creativity to be constrained, where a bottoms-up approach might be useful. But sometimes you want, like DK was talking about, using those tools for brainstorming. Then you do not really want the tool to be constrained too much.
Okay, great. So maybe we can kind of pivot this a little bit to kind of having more of an open discussion. Maybe as a starting off point, DK, what's your take on that? I mean, who would you want to put the bet on? Bottom-up model discovery approaches to creativity, or top-down human approaches?
So I think for now, these tools are very good at brainstorming, right? So I mean, of course, you can engineer in some sort of inspirations to be very different from already existing things, and then you leave it up to the humans to filter things out. And I think it's also very interesting because a lot of the studies that came out based on field experiments, or no, lab experiments, have this lab experiments on the Gen AI's effect on creativity or some productivity on some sort of performance. There's always this theme of like the bad ones go to middle or better, right, and then the bad, like experts don't benefit as much. I think that's measuring different things. If you talk about those who are at the top, like artists, I had a talk with dean of a Juilliard who think this is the best thing that they came, best thing for them. So they have a better taste, they have a better training. So these tools will now put them even more far above, right? And content creators too. So I think I don't know what would happen to the actual distribution. So we have follow-up papers on that. Is it maverick, mastermind, creating the, expanding the landscape, or is it just everyone just like, again, enabled by this, creating the, expanding the landscape? To answer your question, I think I do also have a paper related to something like this on patents, right? So disentangled representation learning on patents. So for that, I think the best thing would be, now you make the model, learn about the hits, right? Gerald Genta's All the Watches, right? Is known for all these very well liked watches, and then maybe from there just like provide different differentiation, and then artists choose and things like that. I think that would be the most fruitful.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's the case of having these new tools, certainly at the high end. Like, for example, the art we have today is better than cave art. Okay. And so, well, not that cave art wasn't bad, but it was very limited because you just had limited tools, you're able to produce it. And so basically you put it in the hands of creative people, then basically you can come up with everything. Yannick, do you have a perspective on any of this?
Yeah, I think I'm very much agreeing with what Dokyun just mentioned. What I'm thinking worrying a lot is in the long term, whether now if we kind of adopt those models and maybe we just like the final switch where we take an image or we do not take an image, and to stick with this example, whether we lose our creativity over time, and whether we kind of lose the ability to generate like novel content. And especially like Dokyun, you talked about novelty and about the value of content. I think if you look at the very top percentile in terms of creative people, they only get there through like a ladder, right? So you learn, you have an entire career of creativity, and you train it like a muscle. And I think that might be something where for now we do not really see the effects, but maybe in a couple of years down the road we see something where for problems where you really have to think out of the box, let's say to come up with quantum theory or coming up with irrational numbers, right? These are things where you truly have to think in different realms than you've done before. I think it's just very curious whether we will get into a narrative where this is going to be harder for us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good concern. Like, for example, if Gen AI is trained on a knowledge base, and then that's sort of affecting people from contributing, right? What would happen at the end? But for creative images like this, I feel like people are just inherently interested and enjoy this, akin to when photography came. Art did not die, right? So I feel like we're going to have a same sort of impact, at least on the creative side, because people just generally like this and genuinely just like it's enjoyable. So, and also it's not like people producing it and then just taking it as is. People also edit on top of that. But I think I agree with you, Yannick, in terms of like what would happen to things like knowledge base, where people might not be motivated to contribute, where the models don't have anything to learn from after a while. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, that basically you end up so in a short, it's almost sort of suggesting this dark vision of the future, which is just the opposite of what people are worried about with AI, where actually it sort of self-extinguishes. It sort of, everybody basically keeps doing the same thing when AI produces, it stops learning, and then all thinking stops, and I don't know, that's that would be really an interesting sci-fi movie to make. So
and in a sense, like it's what we already see, right? Dokyun, you mentioned that like novelty decreases over time after the adoption of Gen AI, and probably in the future we will train on generated images, those models. So like we see like decreasing novelty, and then we maybe have self and re-emphasizing effects based on this.
Yeah, I have like a couple of thoughts that I would like to add, like on this point. So about one point that Yannick just said, that the concern that we might just retrain on generative AI. I think that so at the Wharton conference last year in San Francisco, there was a guy from Facebook who gave a talk, and I spoke to him about this. So this is a serious thing that they have been thinking about for a long time, that they do not want to retrain on things generated by these models. So I mean, how they do it? Do they have a data set? I mean, he did not disclose how they do it essentially, but they do know about this problem, and they do not want to do it. That retrain on data generated by ChatGPT or dall-e or Stable Diffusion. And about one more point, I mean, I'm just curious, and I would just like others' take on this. That it's like DK said, that when photography came, art did not die. In fact, maybe because photography could take real pictures of real things, art became more abstract because artists wanted to differentiate themselves. Maybe because this is all happening in the virtual world, art might become more physical. This is just my speculation, like sculpture or like fabrics, or which right now probably you need like a combination of AI and robotics. Maybe in the future that might also go away. But who knows? Yeah, this is just my take.
Yeah. There's just one audience question that came up from it's kind of very closely related to what we were just talking about. It was, if people get too adapted to a style of prompting, which probably works well for them, is there a risk of some sort of monotonicity for our large language models? Anyone want to take that? I guess the answer is yes, but I don't know. And
I would say yes, but the market would probably solve that. People wanting to come up with a different style of prompting to sell that. Obviously, the financial sort of motivation would probably make some people innovate on that end, whether it's actual model or the prompting. So market for prompting and these models probably will solve that.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so one question I have for you: what's next for you guys? What's next? What are you doing now, and what's your next big project, or what's sort of you see sort of the next big problem that you would like to tackle? Or before we do, we got one question on ethics, okay, which it would be unfair to finish a session on AI and creativity without a question on ethics. So we got one. There are, I don't know if you can see it, there are tremendous ethical concerns over the use of AI in journalism and writing, which are disciplined creative fields. You have the same concerns in marketing. Does it really matter if a commercial features a fake mountaintop to sell outdoor gear, even if consumer doesn't know it's AI generated? I'm going to send that one to Yannick, who is the one that was hawking that possibility. What do you think?
I think it's a very personal perspective on ethics, and for sure there is a spectrum in the sense of, like, just as whoever asked the question just mentioned, right? Like selling auto gear for marketing, if the mountains are not real, like does not really have major real life implications. That would be my take. I think it would be more of a problem, for example, if you're a student and you a photography class student, and then you generate your image. What Dokyun also mentioned with the Sony World photography contest last year, where it was not a requirement, but still it was not disclosed, and maybe this is more of an ethical dilemma here. Yeah, so I think it really is and will probably stay a problem that we have to live with in a similar manner than we already had to live with Photoshop, right? You could always kind of fake Photoshop and fake images and use them for your advantage. And I think the ethical dilemma here is the same. However, it's just much more accessible, so to many more people, and hence I think we will see probably more frequent ethical problems arising from this.
Ankit or DK, do you have any different take on that, perhaps?
Yeah, I have like one take, and maybe the DK can follow up. So I think one concern which I've heard, like one is that companies are very have to be careful that they do not end up infringing on any copyrighted material, that by mistake their ad uses something which has a copyright, and then they can be sued. So maybe they have to be more careful when they use them anything for their marketing. And at the same time, I think companies like Disney, etc., I like New York Times case has shown that their material, like Mickey Mouse, etc., is now increasingly shown in images created by these models. So which which is a matter of concern for them, that their creation can be used by anybody. And finally, I think in this particular space, in the image space, one major concern is that you might just start creating all sorts of content which you do not want to proliferate, like lots of images of violence or lots of images of pornography, etc. And so that's not related to marketing as such, but that's like a very, very broad ethical concern.
Yeah, so same. I was going to talk about the copyright and AI and regulation. It's we don't have the tools yet, for example, to reliably detect, is it actually infringing, or if it's generated by the tools, can we prevent it? I don't, who knows? Another thing, so to answer your question, Bob, so we have several papers following the, what I pitched about the interaction between creativity and human group level, as well as what's actually happening. Some papers related to AI and regulations. But one thing I wanted to end with is that I'm looking forward with the Apple Vision Pro, with Apple Pro, right? That just launched.
Apple Vision Pro, yeah.
Yes, I am looking forward to text to world model, just like Star Trek, where I can produce a world with the text and I can experience it with the Apple Vision Pro.
I mean, it is kind of like pushing $4,000 if you get like the full thing. So you really want it for that price. So that'll be really interesting whether that will end up being like a really takeoff thing or Google Glass. Let me end on that. What do you think? You brought it up, DK. What do you think of the likelihood that that's going to see anything close to widespread consumer adoption?
I have no idea. I mean, I know I want one. I want the holodeck.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you're like in the extreme out tail of these sorts of people. Ankit, are you thinking about running down to the Apple store and getting a Vision Pro?
Maybe not now, but I guess, like DK is saying that maybe in 10 years, maybe it'll be very common. So maybe, but I might probably not buy that right away.
Yeah. Yannick, are you going to get one? Get it?
We actually ordered one already. So
oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Well, this is like
so it probably takes another 2 weeks. I'm really excited about it. But to also answer your question, I think I can really assume that people will adopt it in long term. Probably, if it wouldn't be the case, it's based on the assumptions, not really on the technology. I think that's, and the cost will also drop.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly I have it on my birthday list for a present for my wife will hopefully give me. So we'll see. Well, anyway, we're kind of about out of time. So I wanted to thank everybody, the three of you, Yannick, Ankit, and DK, for coming along today. And I learned a lot, and I think it was a fun interaction and fun exchange and so forth. And thanks for everyone else who's had the time to kind of join us. And as we indicated, we have this is one of a series of these sort of webinars, and hopefully you can join us for all the future ones. The next one's going to be fascinating. It's going to be on AI and work and workplace. And that's going to be on same time, same place, but it will be in a couple of weeks on February 16th. So, so with that as a goodbye, thanks so much for joining us.